Hey everyone, welcome back to Hobbies with Jose. I'm Jose Carbajal, and today we've got our first masterpiece review. Thanks for joining me again, everyone. It's great to have you here. Now, masterpieces don't happen very often, and I've been sitting on Masterpiece 51 RC for a while, so I'm excited to finally bring you this review today. Especially considering the over-tuned accuracy and bloated prices of some of the more recent releases. But before we dive into RC, let's take a quick look at the box, and it's kind of dull. I'm not exactly sure when Takara Tomy started doing this, but I believe it was with Masterpiece Hound when I opened the box it came delivered in and saw this box and thought, oh no. I was really afraid that they had done away with the classic design dating all the way back to MP1 for this generic looking thing. There is zero color whatsoever, and more striking, no images of the figure itself. Thankfully, that's not the case, as inside we see the gorgeous traditional box design we know and love. And this design has really held up over the years with its simplicity. We have some nice photos in the front of both vehicle mode and bot mode in a fantastic pose. There's the great light rays we see behind the vehicle mode as well. And the OG Transformers logo on the top left with Masterpiece below it in a striking silver foil print. I should note that the vehicle and bot have a glossier finish as opposed to the matte black of the rest of the box. Really helps them pop. And on the top right we have the Takara Tomy logo. Also interesting is that the outer box has the Hasbro logo in the bottom right corner. Maybe that's why they include these outer boxes? It's odd that the logo doesn't appear on the actual box, but I'm certainly not complaining about that. And on the lower left, we have the Autobot logo with the MP51 designation. We also see she's a Cybertronian warrior, and finally her name, Arcee. Finally, on the bottom right, we have the Transformers Japanese logo, and next to that, the Lifelong Design stamp. If I remember correctly, the first time I saw this stamp was on MP36 Masterpiece Megatron, and when I first saw it, I just thought it was a declaration that this figure was made to last long, which was great since MP05 Megatron was pretty much a disaster. But no, the stamp actually refers to the Long Life Design Award for, quote, honoring designs that will become the cornerstone of living and society, and that are desired to continue to play the role in the future, and designs with the power to continue to be a standard beyond value that changes with the times. Now, I won't lie, I had to read that a few times, but I guess it basically means it's for good designs? Which I won't argue with here, but let's not jump ahead of ourselves. On the top of the box, we have the G1 Transformers logo and Masterpiece, both in the same silver foil, and the same specifics of the figure right below. The bottom has Japanese words that I won't try to translate here. On the left side, we have a nice shot of the vehicle mode's profile view, with the bottom cable suspiciously darkened. I'm sure that's just lighting, right? Right? And on the right side, we get some major fan service with RC and bot mode, which, if I had a backpack that big, I'd be lying down too. Finally, on the back, we get more Japanese writing, but most importantly, some nice little shots of RC's accessories, including her weapons and various blast effects, her vehicle mode side accessory and interior detail, more poses and her variety of faces, including her visor look, and also with fellow bots Ultra Magnus and Hot Rod, which they just look great together. But enough gawking at pictures. We've got the real deal right inside, so let's crack this baby open. And we can see everything is nice and neatly packed inside with Arcee and her vehicle mode and accessories all around her. First, let's take a peek at the instructions, and oh god. Now at first, they can seem daunting, but what the hell? But they're fairly well laid out and not terrible to follow. Certainly some tricky spots, which we'll get to later on. Here's the included card, and I gotta say I miss the days of the old Masterpiece cards showing the amazing drawings of the bot modes over the classic grid backgrounds. Those were always nice to admire. But now the artwork has them in dynamic poses and include their alt modes as well, which also looks nice. On the back we have some photos of Arcee in both bot and vehicle mode, more Japanese writings, and her stats. But now let's finally see the main gal herself and what the instructions call the supercar mode. And who am I to argue? Arcee's vehicle mode looks like it jumped right out of the '86 movie. Those futuristic cars will always have a soft spot in my heart, and MP51 RC is very faithful to the source material. Those sleek curves and the bubblegum pink paint job really make her pop. Overall, her panel lines are kept to a relative minimum, except for the center gray area. It gets a little busy looking with all the hinges, but not a deal breaker. The front of the vehicle looks clean, and the section that eventually becomes RC's chest lines up very well with the rest of the hood. And I always forget that G1 RC doesn't have any headlights, which looks a tad odd at first, but you totally get used to the look. The dash has some very nice detailing molded in that's been superbly painted too. There's even what I believe to be a tiny odometer reading as well. That's pretty amazing. The seats themselves are nothing to write home about. They certainly don't look very comfortable to sit on, but for the limited space they had to work with, they look perfectly adequate. Right behind the seats we have the fin that really became a staple of the '86 movie's designs. I'm just glad they didn't put it on RC's head. But it's well sculpted and feels pretty solid. It moves around slightly when nudged, but only really comes off if you pull it straight up. Thankfully it easily pops back in though. Now most car alt modes tend to fail when it comes to the rear, and MP51 RC is a bit of a mixed bag. She does have molded rear lights painted in red which look great. They almost look like decals that were expertly applied within the molded lines. The one on the right could have been a tad straighter, but it doesn't ruin the look one bit. You just have to disregard RC's butt cheeks hanging out of the bottom. But from the angle you'll mostly be seeing her in alt mode, those cheeks will hardly be noticeable. Speaking of cheeks, we can see from the bottom of her alt mode just how tightly she's packed in there. Very little room for error, but everything does fit snugly in its place. The only tricky part can be the arms. They may require a bit of work. All of her included accessories are for bot mode, except for this piece which attaches to the front passenger underside. It simulates the spinning spikes that she used in that one episode. I think she only used it once, but Takara Tomy loves including details like this. And it's pretty cool, although I'll never use it again. Okay, but we've seen enough of RC's supercar mode. Let's see what the always innovative masterpiece transformation has in store for us, and get this gal into her bot mode. And here she is, Masterpiece 51 RC in all of her bot glory. And overall, I think she looks great. There's definitely a couple of issues, 2 to be exact, but they're not deal breakers for me. Starting with what's probably the biggest one, and it's the one that certainly everyone's talking about, and that's her chest, of course. Let's get this out of the way. It does look off, but mostly from the side. I do think Takara Tomy tried to overly sexualize her a bit and ended up making her chest pointier than it needed to be. The fact that her chest does become the front of the vehicle mode doesn't excuse this. That being said, I think about it less and less, so it's not that big of a deal for me. The other slight issue I have is her waist. Gone is the blocky waist of G1 RC, and in its place is a more definite human female-like waist. Now, she certainly has other round, non-bot looking parts like her arms and legs, but whereas those are basically a series of molded tubes, kind of like the internet, her waist is certainly molded to be human-like, which overall sticks out to me. But this is totally subjective though, and again, a minor quibble. What's not subjective is just how much her back is arched. I think this was somewhat necessary to accommodate her backpack. Speaking of which, I am 99% okay with how this backpack looks. We're never going to get a cartoon accurate G1 RC with a tiny backpack. That's never going to happen. And yet, I'm really impressed with how far the designers were able to compress the rear vehicle section and fit it snugly inside of the front vehicle section. What's keeping it from achieving 100% success? Just the gray door parts hanging off the bottom. I do realize it would have been too difficult to tuck them in out of view, but I do wish they would have at least rotated them so we saw the smoother door side rather than the busier looking underside. Nonetheless, this is quite the engineering marvel. Did I say I only had 2 issues? Okay, I lied. I've got just one more. Her hands are very intricately molded with articulation on her first and second knuckles, and her index finger can bend independently of the others as well. The weird ones are her thumbs, which rotate at a somewhat odd angle. I'm not sure whether designers did this, as I don't think it would have hindered with the transformation or how her hands fit underneath her vehicle mode, or even holding weapons. That'll just be a mystery for the ages, I suppose. Okay, enough negativity. I don't want this to seem like I hated this figure, because that couldn't be farther from the truth. Her overall sculpting is really phenomenal. Her proportions are good and the paint job looks flawless. Even the pink vehicle parts that you might think are just molded in pink have a shinier pink coat on top. The great paint job does make the non-painted hands stick out just a tad though. I have to figure they run a higher risk of chipping with all of those tiny hinges. Even the sculpting on her butt looks great. Moving her legs up doesn't cause any significant gaps in the joints. And you know that's not by accident. No, this is a butt Cybertron can be proud of. Another thing that really impressed me was the sculpting of her face. And while it's not a 100% recreation of her animated face, it comes pretty darn close. It could be that when we originally saw the first shots of Masterpiece RC, her face seemed more pointed and elongated. I'm unsure if Takara Tomy actually refined the sculpt or if it was an unfortunate trick of the camera, but the sculpt we actually got looks great. And she has a very similar feature as MP26 Hot Rodimus's visor gimmick, but RC takes it one step further. And it's tied to her face swapping gimmick too. You simply slide her face up and reinsert it into the second set of grooves. Then you fold out the visor and now you have enough space to fold it over her eyes. This is such a perfect solution because it doesn't leave any gaps where her face meets her helmet when she's not using the visor. Speaking of her face swapping gimmick, she has a trio of extra expressions included, although admittedly there's not a whole lot of variation in them. This is her happy face, although she's already smiling in her standard face. Here we have her surprise face. You can see her eyes are just a bit wider here. And lastly we have Arcee's sad face. Her eyes are noticeably more droopy. Overall they look good, but I think I would have preferred they'd be more expressive. And toss in a pissed face in there too. As for the rest of Arcee's accessories, she includes a variety of weapons and corresponding blast effects, and even a holster as well. This is the simplest weapon in terms of paint because it doesn't have any, and it looks pretty cheap because of it. You're meant to use the smaller blast effect, although the larger one fits on it as well. Also, this weapon fits into the aforementioned holster, which you can tap into Arcee's leg. Arcee's largest weapon is this rifle, which has a matching two-tone pink paint job, and it looks pretty great. Again, you're meant to use the larger of the blast effects, although the smaller one fits as well. You can get some great sniper poses with Arcee visored up too. And her final gun is probably the most popular as it's the one that shows up most on image searches. This little guy has great detailing and is fully painted too. You can also attach what I consider to be the best of the blast effects right over the barrel. And this just looks loud. But how do you get her into these great poses? Why, with some great articulation, of course. Let's start at the top and work our way down. Arcee has a ball joint at the base of her head and a hinge joint at the base of her neck. She has a very nice butterfly hinge as well, and her shoulder has a swivel which can rotate as far as her backpack allows and can rotate outward too. There's bicep rotation Her elbow has a main hinge, but there's a second hinge which allows for extra range too. Her wrists rotate and can fold up or down. And the previously mentioned fingers have hinges at the first knuckle and at the second knuckle too. And the index finger can rotate independently of the other fingers. And her thumb rotates at the base knuckle. Her waist is on a ball joint and can rotate, although not 360 degrees. Her legs are on a ratchet joint and can move up that far. And thanks to her transformation, she can move them up even further. They don't rotate back at all though. The knees are on a single joint, but the pink center kneecap moves independently of the rest. This helps a fully folded knee to look natural without any gaps. And lastly, the feet can move up and down and have an excellent pivot too. The toes can bend up and down, mainly due to transformation. But all that transformation does come at a cost thanks to her backpack. It can be tricky to achieve certain poses, but when you do, she is an absolute masterpiece. Not without her shortcomings, but in many areas excel far above my expectations. For that, she'll be proudly joining the rest of my masterpiece collection. But before anyone asks, no, I will not be customizing her. $150 is too high of a price to potentially break her, and honestly, she doesn't need any customization. She is damn near perfect as is. These two, however,